Forgotten FNQ is an independent investigative podcast. The details, timelines, and findings discussed are drawn directly from public court documents, Queensland Coronial Inquest findings, police and witness statements, and published news archives. All individuals mentioned are presumed innocent, and this podcast focuses strictly on the established public record and forensic facts of cases. Before we get started today, guys, I just want to jump in with a really quick content warning. In this episode, we will be discussing pretty sensitive topics, including violent crime, detailed physical injuries, and crime scene forensics. So if you've got little ones in your car and you're driving, or if this kind of content is really tough for you to hear, please keep that in mind before listening on. Hey everyone, Shani here. Welcome back to Forgotten FNQ. It's kind of hard to believe that it's already been 2 weeks since we dropped episode 1. The response from you guys have been it's absolutely overwhelming for me. I've had so many emails, messages, comments from locals, even from people who've lived up here in the 90s. And we've had true crime listeners clock in all the way across Australia, America, Germany, and Spain. Really? That's just huge to me. Thank you so much to everyone who's listened, shared the show, and sent in messages. It really does mean a lot to me to bring these stories back to life and back into community awareness. So we're sitting inside a huge story today, guys. So take a deep breath, settle in with your cuppa, and we'll go over a recap of what we learned back in episode 1, where we spoke about the kind of people Julianne and Vicky were. We talked about Alan Leahy's statement to the police. I think we poked a few holes in that timeline. So even right up until 6:15 a.m. the next morning, where he pulled his white work van into the Atherton service station. So if you haven't heard that episode, please jump back into it. Have a quick listen. It's only a short episode. This one's a bit longer, but it is definitely worth hearing about Alan's statement to the police because it contradicts the very timeline that he later gave to police. So I feel like this is where we need to spend some real time today, is understanding how this case went, what I think was so catastrophically off the rails in pretty much the first 48 hours even. So we'll look at directly at the initial police response. And much of what we know about the sheer failure of those early days was meticulously documented by investigative journalist Robert Reed in his landmark book, Third Party to Murder, The Search. Now, if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend getting your hands on it. Robert Reed has just got a way with words and the way he describes the case. He's very close to the family members and he's onto everything, in real time. So that book is really worth a read. When Alan reports his wife missing on Saturday, July 27th, the local authorities didn't really step back and look at a broader picture, right? So they didn't secure Danzier Drive where Julianne and Alan lived. They didn't treat Vicky Arnold's car on the footpath with $500 cash sitting inside as a red flag. Instead, I guess they looked at Alan's statement and just went with this narrative bias. They took Alan Leahy's story, this late night Scrabble and spontaneous sub-zero temperature fishing trip, and they accepted it as absolute gospel. So because Alan said that the women went to Lake Tinaroo, the entire investigative focus of the Regional Police Department in Atherton locked onto Lake Tinaroo with what seems to be a bit of tunnel vision even. So picturing Lake Tinaroo in late July, it is a massive body of water. It's deep and murky. It's surrounded by muddy banks and dense bushland. It's a timber dam. I will put photographs of Lake Tinaroo up on the Facebook page, Instagram, and TikTok, just so you can take a look at the area. It's huge. It's not like searching a neighborhood park. Searching Lake Tinaroo takes huge resources. So police establish a search base out at the dam. Boats are launched. SES volunteers are called out in droves. Locals even turn up because everybody knows Julianne and Vicky. So they're dragging the water, searching for, I guess, a submerged white four-wheel drive or the women's fishing equipment or something. Helicopters are even sent out to sweep over the water's edge. So day after day, officers and local volunteers are freezing on the shoreline, staring into this, remember, the thick morning fog that rolls off Tinaroo in late July. I actually spoke with a local searcher who was out at Tinaroo Dam during those first freezing early days. She did give me permission to share her story with you today. These are her exact words, but they're obviously going to be in my voice. Quote, "I'll never forget the cold out at the dam those first few mornings. The mist was so heavy on the water that you could barely see 20 feet in front of the boat. We were out there freezing, dragging shorelines, pulling at branches in the water. Here we are thinking these two young women, one of whom's a mum, had somehow slipped into the deep. So every time someone spotted something white in the dark timbers, my heart literally dropped into my stomach. We spent days out there looking for these women. We never dreamt that they'd be found where they were eventually found." Unquote. So that just gave me chills. Like, even rereading it back now, those brave volunteers are pouring their hearts out at the dam, freezing in the mist, while the police completely ignore alternative possibilities. So in his book, Robert Reed points out some critical missteps made by local investigators during that very first week. We'll recap them here. And thank you to Robert Reed for his meticulous documentation of this case, because for public record, we're talking back in 1991, so what we do have to rely on is directly, mostly from Robert Reed's book. So the failure to investigate the domestic history is one thing that stands out, especially for me. So despite multiple prior domestic disturbance calls to Danziger Drive, police initially treat Alan Leahy strictly as this, I guess, grieving, helpful husband rather than a person of interest or even a key witness that needs more in-depth interrogation. I don't think you'll find that situation now in the police force, but back then, I guess it's just like, poor guy, his wife's gone missing. We better not even bother talking to him too much about it. Very strange indeed. So the physical anomalies that were ignored were, as I stated before, Vicky Arnold's car, which just sat untouched outside Danziger Drive. Her handbag, her purse, $500 cash inside, it's all sitting inside the car. In any standard missing persons protocol, the vehicle should have been towed immediately, fingerprinted, and treated, I guess, as a potential site of conflict, but it wasn't. The sighting by an Atherton local was also ignored. So when this local resident came forward and he stated that he'd seen this white Nissan Patrol with Julianne and Vicky in the front seats heading towards Herberton, He said that it was between 9 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. with a male passenger in the back. So it seems like police might have just brushed that off because it didn't really fit with Alan's 12:45 a.m. Scrabble timeline. So here's police searching the bottom of a lake for two women who never went anywhere near the water. Can you imagine what 16 days feels like for any family of any missing person? So in small towns like Atherton, Herberton, Mareeba, all the local newspapers such as the Tablelander and the Cairns Post, that's the heartbeat of information back in 1991. So, as these days tick by, the news reports seem to shift from quiet optimism to what seems like terror. So in the first few days, the headlines are, the standard missing persons reports. Two local women missing on fishing trip. The articles detail police appeals for anyone who might have seen the white Nissan Patrol near Lake Tinaroo. By day 5, 6, 7, the tone in the papers, it definitely begins to change. So search commanders are quoted stating that extensive drags of Tinaroo Dam had yielded zero physical evidence. There's no oil slicks on the water, no tyre tracks leading off boat ramps, there's no floating debris, no fishing rods. Yet day after day, families are forced to read newspaper reports, focusing almost exclusively on these water searches. Now, Vicky Arnold's family knew Vicky well. They knew she was a meticulous accountant who just wouldn't vanish into thin air, leaving her bills unpaid, her commitments ignored, let alone the $500 cash that's sitting on her car seat. They begged authorities to look beyond the lake. The town of Atherton, let's remember it's small in 1991, it's also gripped by rumours. So people are talking in the aisles of the newsagents, they're leaning over counters at the local butcher, they're standing outside the pubs. Questions were like, did they drop off the grid? Did the car just go into a deep shaft? Is somebody in town holding them against their will? This is 16 agonizing days of silence. So 16 days where the trail, it almost goes completely stone cold while searchers are pulling empty nets out of Lake Tinaroo. So then comes Sunday, August the 9th, 1991. It's day 16. So to picture where we are now, you have to understand the geography out here in the Tablelands. We're not at Lake Tinaroo anymore. We are in the exact opposite direction from Atherton. So about 12 kilometres out of Atherton, tucked off the Herberton-Atherton Road, is a secluded, I guess it's a rugged area. It's known as Cherry Tree Creek. So now I want to walk you through the physical reality of what's found at Cherry Tree Creek. This is where I feel the official narrative constructed by the local police, it becomes fractured beyond repair. So within an hour of arriving on scene, the senior local officers begin pushing this. It's a remarkably swift and really neat little explanation. They claim this is a murder-suicide. Before any real investigations have even began, police management have started discussing concerns over the police budget, overtime. They reckon the scene should be cleared up and the bodies moved. And by 8 p.m. that very same night, the officers had already informed the Leahy family that this was a closed case of murder-suicide. Now, it's a pretty convenient narrative. It closes the books and means there's no killer on the loose in the Tablelands. So, that looks tidy. But when you examine the cold, hard physical evidence at the scene and all the findings that were brought about during coronial inquests and subsequent reports, this initial murder-suicide theory completely shatters. So looking at what the investigators were actually confronted with when they approached that white Nissan four-wheel drive stranded in the scrub. So keeping in mind that the environmental conditions are brutal, right? It's sub-zero temperature winter weather. Inside the vehicle, the ignition's turned on, and so are the headlights, and the heater was running on setting 3. Julianne's body is found in the driver's seat. She's suffered 2 gunshot wounds. One's entered near the left corner of her mouth and a fatal shot to the outer aspect of her left eye. She has sharp, force knife cuts across her neck. And strikingly, the driver's seat belt's actually been removed and it's looped twice tightly around her neck. Blunt force trauma has also been inflicted on her, especially on her left hand. It's actually to the point where it's bent the ring on her finger. Vicky Arnold's positioned, she's sort of slouching in the front passenger footwell. Her legs are outside towards the ground and her upper torso is sort of slumped back into the car. Now her shoes, they're just slip-on white shoes. They're found lying on the dirt track. One's 17 metres, the other one's 21 metres behind the vehicle. When the autopsies conducted, the pathologists discovered that Vicky suffered not 1, but 3 separate gunshot wounds. So there's one under her chin, a non-fatal shot into her upper left thigh, and a fatal shot behind her right ear. Laying inside the vehicle is a wooden-handled serrated steak knife jammed against Vicky's upper thigh. There's also a blood-stained small plate-sized rock that's near the passenger seat frame, and the weapon itself, which is a shortened .22 caliber Ruger self-loading rifle. Now, weeks later, the hacksaw and the cut-off barrel and stock pieces used to shorten that rifle, they're discovered inside a pillowcase in Vicky's carport. But that's a story for another day, because that's really very, very interesting part of this story that we will go into in depth. Now, just sit back and let's have a look at the sheer mechanics of this scene with me, right? So to accept this initial police narrative, you first off have to believe that 27-year-old Vicky Arnold shot Julianne twice, slashed her neck with a steak knife, wrapped a seatbelt twice around her neck, and then turned the rifle on herself, shooting herself in the thigh, under the chin, and as well behind the right ear. I mean, where's the physical logic in that? I just can't even. Pathology evidence also reveals that the fatal wound behind Vicky's right ear, it showed almost no carbon or powder residue. So that generally indicates the shots likely fired from, an intermediate distance rather than hard contact. So as lead pathologists testify, if that shot was fired from more than contact range, it was actually physically impossible for Vicky to have even inflicted it on herself. So further to that, expert testimony notes that when someone suffers an instantly fatal head wound, they do not neatly reposition the rifle across their body. So as independent forensic reviews, coronial inquests, they ultimately highlight that, the physical evidence here actually points towards a catastrophic third-party involvement. Yet, this early police handling rushed to judgment on day one, and key physical evidence is overlooked. The scene and the security is compromised, and the pursuit of truth is just, it's derailed for decades. independent pathologists, ballistic experts, journalist Robert Reed, and even eventually the Queensland State Coroner conclude this physical evidence screams third-party involvement. This seems to be an attack executed by superior physical force. It's a brutal, multi-weapon assault carried out by a third person who staged the scene to look like a desperate struggle between two friends. Yet, despite it's a horrific, complex scene. So early police handling led to critical contamination. The scene security is compromised, key items are handled without proper forensic containment, and this initial rush to the judgment of murder-suicide, it really set back the pursuit of justice by literally decades. So we've got two young women, one's a mum, their daughters, their loyal friends, they're left in the freezing cold scrub at Cherry Tree Creek. The initial police investigation just wanted this quick and quiet answer, and there's a mountain of physical evidence screaming that a killer has just walked away. So the Arnold family never accepted this convenient police narrative, and I don't blame them. They fought for years and demanded inquest after inquest after inquest. They uncovered, ballistics errors. They pushed through the noise and they fought to clear Vicky's name and uncover the real perpetrator. So in our next episode, we're going to look at what happened to that vehicle after that initial police bungle of murder-suicide. We're going to break open that fight for justice, and we'll delve into some more shocking details that were revealed during the 2011 coronial inquest, as well as some of the suspicious, I guess we could call them, shadow figures who moved through Atherton back in 1991. So this is Forgotten FNQ, Cold Cases and Missing Persons. We need your help to keep these stories alive. If you were living on the Tablelands in July or August 1991, if you remember seeing that white Nissan four-wheel drive, or if you have any movements or information about Cherry Tree Creek, Danzier Drive, or even Irvanbank back then, please reach out. You can head over to our official Facebook page to view scene maps, newspaper archives, and timeline breakdowns. You can also email our investigative team directly, as well as confidentially. I always struggle with that word. I don't know why. We're at fnqcoldcasefiles@hotmail.com. We don't want to let these voices be silenced, and we will never let these people be forgotten. I'm Shani. Thanks so much for listening today, guys. Drive safe, and I'll talk to you next fortnight.